Hello, ma'am. I am Selmels Kikapai, and my report is all about the Module 2 in CA200. Contents of this Module 2: the history of philosophy and objectives of imprisonment and the development of prisons, Sing Sing Prison, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System, 5 deployment of prisoners, forms of punishment, age of Enlightenment, personalities behind correctional institutions, Cesar Marquez of Vicaria Bonacaya, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conqueror, Enrico Ferri, and Clifford Shaw. Chapter 2: The History, Philosophy, and Objectives of Imprisonment and the Development of Prisons. The history of imprisonment. The original purpose of confining a person within a prison was not to punish them, but was a means of keeping the perpetrator of a crime detained until the actual punishment could be carried out. This was usually in a form of corporal punishment that was intended to cause the guilty person in pain, such as being beaten with a whip, or capital punishment, which used a variety of methods to claim the lives if condemned individuals. Ancient and medieval. The use of prisons can be tracked back to the rise of the state as a form of social organization, corresponding with the advent of the state was the development of written language, which enabled the creation of formalized legal codes as official guidelines for society. The best known of these early legal codes is the Code of Hammurabi, written in Babylon around 1750 BC. The penalties for violations of the laws in Hammurabi's code were almost exclusively centered on the concept of lex talionis, the law of retaliation, whereby people were punished as a form of vengeance, often by the victims themselves. This notion of punishment as vengeance or retaliation can also be found in many legal codes from early civilization, including the ancient Sumerian codes, the the Indian Manu, Manusmriti, Manava Dharma Sastra, the Hermes Trismegistus of Egypt, and the Israelite Mosaic Law. Some ancient Greek philosophers, such as Plato, began to develop ideas of using punishment to, to reform offenders instead of simply using it for its own sake. Imprisonment as a penalty was used initially for those who could not afford to pay their fines. Eventually, since impoverished Athenians could not pay their fines, leading to indefinite periods of imprisonment time limits were set instead. The prison in ancient Athens was known as the Desmoterion place of chains. The Romans were among the first to use prisons as a form of punishment rather than simply for detention. A variety of existing structures were used to house prisoners, such as metal cages, basements of public buildings, and quarries. One of the most notable Roman prison was the Mamertine prison, established around 640 BC by Ancus Marcius. The Mamertine prison was located within a sewer system beneath ancient Rome and contained a large network of dungeons where prisoners were held in squalid conditions, contaminated with human waste. Forced labor on public works projects was also a common form of punishment. The philosophy of imprisonment. Niemand is meer slave als der zich voor vrijheid ohne is zu zijn. One, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Five sentencing philosophies. There are five basic sentencing philosophies that justify why we punish those who break our criminal laws: retribution, incapacitation, rehabilitation, deterrence, and restoration. These philosophies are not esoteric theories, rather, they come very much from our human nature and common sense. Poetic justice. Why do we build prisons, not daycare? Lock 'em up. What do we care? Hire cops, not counselors. Staff courts, not clinics. Wage warfare, not welfare. Invest in felons. Ripen them like melons. Eat them raw, then ask for more. More poverty, more crime. More men in prison. More fear in the street. More ex-cons among us. Poetic Justice by Robert Johnson. Why do we punish? Why do we use prison instead of other types of punishment? In this chapter, we are concerned with the fundamental rationale for the existence of prison. What do we want them to be? A punishment is a natural response to fear and injury, and prison seems to be our favorite punishment. Philosophy of punishment. Most people would agree that hurting someone or subjecting them to pain is wrong. However, a punishment by definition involves the infliction of pain. Does this make punishment wrong? Philosophers are, are divided on this issue. One group believes that inflicting pain as punishment is fundamentally different from inflicting pain on innocence and therefore is not inherently wrong. Another group believes that punishment is a wrong that can be justified only if it results in a greater good. Morphine, 1995. Those who hold the first view do not feel it necessary to justify punishment beyond the fact that the individual deserves it. This would be considered a retributive approach. The second view justifies punishment through the secondary rationales of deterrence, incapacitation, or rehabilitation. This will be called the utilitarian approach by Durham, 1994. The retributive rationale. The first philosophical approach or rationale is that punishment strictly defined is not evil. Retribution is a term that means balancing a wrong through punishment, while revenge is personal and not necessarily proportional to the victim's injury. Retribution is impersonal and balanced. Newman, although recognizing the difficulty of defining punishment, defines it in this way. A punishment is a pain of or other unpleasant consequence that results from an offense against a rule and that is administered by others who represent legal authority to the offender who broke the rule. The objectives of imprisonment. Prisons are the four major purposes of prisons. These purposes are retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation. Retribution means punishment of crimes against society. Depriving criminals of their freedom is a way of making them pay a debt to society for their crimes. Incapacitation refers to the removal of criminals from society so they can no longer harm innocent people. Five reasons the purpose of imprisonment. Number one is punishment. Deprivation of freedom or removal from the free society. Sentences usually consider the legitimate expectation of the public in deciding on a sentence that supports this objective because unless the public regard this punishment as at least in some respect fitting the crime, respect for the law will be diminished. Number two is deterrence. The idea is that convicted offenders will not repeat the crime because the punishment taught him the consequences of offending. It also serves to caution others against committing similar crime when they see the degree of punishment. A convicted person gets general deterrence. Long sentences or death penalty produce both specific and general deterrence. Light and non-custodial sentences have very little, if any, deterrent effect either to the actual offender or those who may commit such crime in the future. Rehabilitation. This is a sentencing objective where the sentencer is convinced that the offender has a need to remediation. Some persons argue that for this sentencing objective to be met, the offender must have led a normal law abiding life prior to his arrest for crime, has accepted a responsibility for his crime, has shown remorse, and promised that he will take advantage of opportunities for rehabilitation. No other choice. This is an emerging objective of sentencing where the sentencer, having looked at the criminal records of a habitual offender, especially one who has been offered opportunities for rehabilitation in the past but continues to offend and make a decision to imprison him because there is nothing else uh, the court can do for him. The Sing Sing prison. At the Sing Sing prison, uh, in full, Sing Sing Correctional Facility Maximum Security Prison located in Ossining, New York, in use since 1826. It is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States, and it is also among the most well known in the country, especially notable for its harsh conditions in the 19th and 20th century. Linz resigned as warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Auburn in 1838. He was asked to leave that prison a year later after the death of a prisoner who was punished severely for in 1825. The state of New York appropriated 20,100 dollars to purchase a 130-acre site on the Hudson River for what is now the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. By May of the year, 100 incarcerated men were transported from the Auburn prison to a new site in the town of Mount Pleasant, also the prison's original name, but without a place to receive them or a wall to enclosure them. The U-Born system. The U-Born system penal method of the 90th century in which persons worked during the day and were kept in solitary confinement at night with enforced silence at all times. The silent system evolved during the 1820 at Auburn Prison in Auburn, New York as an alternative to and modification of the Pennsylvania system of solitary confinement which is gradually replaced in the United States. Auburn State Prison, located in Auburn, New York, opened in 1816. It established a disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal punishment, and congregate group labor. In architecture and routine, Auburn became the model for prison throughout the United States. Clifford Robshaw was an American sociologist and criminologist. He was a major figure in the Chicago School of Sociology during the 1930 and 1940, and, it, and is considered to be one of the most influential figures in American Criminology. Shaw and Mackay trace social disorganization to conditions endemic to the urban areas that were the only places the newly arriving poor could afford to live in. Particular, a high rate of turnover in the population and and mixes of people from different cultural backgrounds. The social disorganization theory developed by Shaw and Mackay based on their studies of Chicago has pointed to social causes of delinquency that seems to be located in specific geographical areas. Wala to